The last scholar of Alexandria, Hypatia's final stand dying, another is being born. The ancient world, with its marble academies, its fearless pursuit of knowledge, its belief that human reason could unlock the universe's deepest secrets, is breathing its final breaths. But something new is emerging from its ashes, a medieval age that will reshape civilization itself. This isn't just the end of one woman's story. This is the moment when humanity chose a different path forward. In the marble halls of Alexandria, where Euclid once drew his geometric proofs and Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference, the very nature of knowledge itself is being redefined. The question echoing through these ancient corridors isn't just about books or beliefs, it's about what kind of future we'll build. At the center of this epochal transformation stands a woman whose very existence embodies the collision between worlds. Her name is Hypatia, and she represents the last flicker of one age and the first shadow of another. What happens to her will determine not just her own fate, but the trajectory of human thought for the next 1,000 years. Character introduction. Building connection. Hypatia of Alexandria wasn't just any scholar, she was perhaps the last great mathematician and philosopher of the ancient world. Born around 350 CE, she inherited not just her father's mathematical genius, but his revolutionary belief that knowledge belongs to anyone brave enough to seek it, regardless of their gender or social status. Imagine walking through Alexandria in the early 5th century. The city still bears the grandeur of its Hellenistic past, towering lighthouses, marble columns that seem to touch the sky, and streets buzzing with merchants speaking dozen different languages. But underneath this cosmopolitan veneer, tension simmers like water about to boil. Hypatia moves through these streets with the confidence of someone who has never been told she doesn't belong. Tall and elegant, wrapped in the simple white robes of a philosopher, she commands respect not through birth or wealth, but through the sheer force of her intellect. Students from across the Mediterranean travel thousands of miles just to hear her lectures on mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Historical context. The larger picture. To understand Hypatia's story, we must first understand the world she inhabited, a world in transition, where ancient traditions collided violently with emerging new orders. Alexandria in the 4th and 5th centuries was a city caught between worlds. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, it had served as the intellectual capital of the ancient world for nearly 8 centuries. The famous Library of Alexandria, though past its golden age, still represented the pinnacle of human learning. Here, scholars had once preserved and expanded upon the knowledge of Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, and countless other civilizations. But by Hypatia's time, the Roman Empire was transforming. Christianity, once a persecuted minority faith, had become the official religion under Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century. With this transformation came a new worldview that often viewed pagan learning with suspicion, sometimes with outright hostility. The tension wasn't simply between Christians and pagans, it was between different visions of how society should be organized. The old pagan aristocracy, of which Hypatia was a part, believed in the power of reason, debate, and scientific inquiry. Many of the new Christian leaders, while not opposed to learning itself, prioritized faith over reason and saw pagan philosophy as potentially dangerous to Christian souls. The scholar's daily life, intimate details. Let's step into Hypatia's world more intimately. Every morning, she would wake before dawn in her modest home near the museum, the ancient institution that housed Alexandria's greatest scholars. Her day would begin with mathematical calculations, working on problems that pushed the boundaries of contemporary understanding. Hypatia's contributions to mathematics were revolutionary. She wrote commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica, work that wouldn't be fully appreciated until centuries later when it influenced the development of algebra. She also worked on Apollonius's treatise on conic sections, mathematical concepts that would eventually prove crucial for understanding planetary orbits and engineering marvels. But mathematics was just one facet of her genius. As a philosopher, she followed the Neoplatonic tradition, which sought to reconcile Plato's idealism with practical ethics. Her philosophy emphasized the power of rational thought to elevate the human soul, to help people move beyond petty material concerns toward a higher understanding of truth and beauty. Her teaching method was revolutionary for its time. Unlike many philosophers who lectured to passive audiences, Hypatia encouraged active debate and questioning. Her classroom, often the open courtyards of the museum, buzzed with intellectual energy as students from different backgrounds challenged each other's assumptions. One of her most devoted students, Synesius of Cyrene, later became a bishop but maintained his deep respect for his former teacher. His letters to Hypatia, which survive to this day, reveal the profound impact she had on her students. He writes about her not just as a teacher, but as someone who fundamentally changed how he understood the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. Rising tensions, the conflict builds as the 5th century progressed. Alexandria became a powder keg of religious and political tensions. The city's Christian patriarch, Theophilus, had already orchestrated the destruction of the great Serapeum temple in 391 CE, along with many of its precious manuscripts. When his nephew Cyril succeeded him in 412 CE, these tensions escalated dramatically. Cyril was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly uncompromising in his vision of Christian orthodoxy. He saw Hypatia not just as a pagan holdover, but as something far more dangerous, a woman who wielded enormous intellectual influence in a society where women were supposed to be silent and submissive. The political situation made everything worse. Orestes, the Roman prefect governing Alexandria, was himself a Christian but believed in religious tolerance and the value of pagan learning. He often sought Hypatia's counsel on matters of governance, respecting her wisdom and political insight. This relationship infuriated Cyril, who saw it as evidence that pagan influence was corrupting Christian authority. Picture the tension in Alexandria's streets. Christian mobs, stirred up by Cyril's fiery sermons, would gather outside the museum, sometimes shouting accusations of heresy and corruption. Hypatia's students, many of them from wealthy, influential families, would escort her through the city, forming protective circles around their beloved teacher. But Hypatia refused to be intimidated. She continued her lectures, continued her research, and continued to advise anyone who sought her wisdom. Her courage in the face of mounting hostility only increased her students' devotion and her enemies' rage. The philosophical stakes, why this matters, what was really at stake in this conflict went far beyond personal animosity or religious differences. Hypatia represented something profound, the idea that truth could be discovered through reason and inquiry, regardless of what traditional authorities claimed. Her approach to knowledge was radically egalitarian for its time. She believed that mathematical truths belonged to anyone capable of understanding them, whether they were pagan, Christian, male, female, slave, or free. This wasn't just an abstract philosophical position, It was a direct challenge to a society increasingly organized around rigid hierarchies of birth, gender, and religious orthodoxy. Consider what her existence meant to the young women of Alexandria. Here was proof that intellectual achievement wasn't limited by gender, that a woman could command respect through the power of her mind rather than her family connections or physical beauty. She showed that scholarship wasn't just about memorizing ancient texts, it was about pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Her mathematical work embodied this philosophy. When she worked on problems of conic sections or algebraic equations, she wasn't just manipulating abstract symbols. She was demonstrating that the universe operated according to rational principles that human minds could comprehend and describe. This was a profoundly optimistic view of human potential, and a direct challenge to those who argued that important truths could only be received through divine revelation or traditional authority. The tragic climax, March 415 CE. The crisis came to a head in March of 415 CE. Political tensions between Cyril and Orestes had reached a boiling point, with each man commanding loyal followers ready for violence. Hypatia, as Orestes' advisor and friend, found herself directly in the crossfire. On a warm spring morning, Hypatia was returning home from a lecture when her chariot was surrounded by a mob of Christian zealots led by a church reader named Peter. These weren't ordinary citizens caught up in religious fervor, they were an organized group, possibly acting on implicit or explicit encouragement from higher authorities. What happened next has been preserved in historical accounts that still have the power to shock us 15 centuries later. The mob dragged Hypatia from her chariot and into the Caesareum, a church that had once been a pagan temple. There, they stripped her naked, an act designed to humiliate and dehumanize her. Then, using pottery shards and roof tiles, they literally flayed the flesh from her bones. The symbolism was deliberate and horrifying. Pottery shards, ostraka in Greek, were traditionally used for voting in ostracism, the ancient practice of exiling dangerous individuals. By using these implements to kill Hypatia, her murderers were making a statement: this is what happens to those who threaten our social order. After the murder, they burned her dismembered body, ensuring that nothing would remain for burial or veneration. It was an attempt to erase not just Hypatia herself, but everything she represented. Historical impact and legacy. Hypatia's murder sent shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean world. Even many Christians were horrified by the brutality and what it represented. The philosopher Damascus, writing decades later, called it a stain upon Alexandria that could never be washed clean. More immediately, the murder effectively ended Alexandria's role as a center of secular learning. Many pagan intellectuals fled the city, taking their knowledge and expertise to other parts of the Mediterranean world. The great tradition of Alexandrian scholarship, which had preserved and expanded human knowledge for 8 centuries, came to an abrupt and violent end. But perhaps more significant was what Hypatia's death represented symbolically. She became a martyr not for any particular religious belief, but for the principle that knowledge and reason should be free from political and religious interference. Her story would inspire thinkers throughout history who faced similar pressures to conform or be silenced. Broader historical significance. Hypatia's story illuminates one of history's great turning points, the transition from the classical world to the medieval period. This wasn't just a change in political systems or religious beliefs, it was a fundamental shift in how society understood the relationship between authority and knowledge. The classical world, despite all its flaws and limitations, had developed institutions and traditions that valued intellectual inquiry for its own sake. The Museum of Alexandria, the Academy of Athens, the great libraries and schools, these represented the idea that expanding human knowledge was a worthy goal in itself. The emerging medieval worldview, while it would eventually produce its own magnificent intellectual achievements, initially viewed such secular learning with suspicion. Knowledge was valuable insofar as it served religious purposes or practical needs, but the idea of pursuing understanding simply because it was there to be discovered, this seemed dangerous, possibly even impious. Hypatia stood at the fault line between these worldviews. Her murder marked not just the end of one woman's life, but the end of an entire approach to learning and discovery that had defined Mediterranean civilization for nearly a millennium. Lessons for modern audiences. Why should we care about Hypatia's story today? Because the tensions she faced between reason and authority, between individual inquiry and social conformity, between the pursuit of truth and the maintenance of power, these tensions are eternal. Throughout history, societies have repeatedly faced the choice between encouraging free inquiry or suppressing ideas that threaten established interests. The burning of libraries, the persecution of scientists, the silencing of dissenting voices, these patterns repeat across cultures and centuries. Hypatia's courage in the face of mounting pressure reminds us that intellectual freedom isn't something that can be taken for granted. It requires constant vigilance and occasional sacrifice to maintain. Every generation must decide anew whether it values the comfortable certainties of orthodox thinking or the often uncomfortable challenges of open inquiry. Her story also speaks to anyone who has ever felt like an outsider or faced discrimination based on their gender, beliefs, or background. Hypatia succeeded in a world that told her she had no right to exist as she was. She claimed space in institutions that had never been designed for someone like her. Her example shows that barriers can be broken, even when the cost is high. The enduring mystery. One of the most haunting aspects of Hypatia's story is how much we've lost. Her mathematical and philosophical writings have survived only in fragments and references by other authors. We can glimpse the brilliance of her mind only through the admiration of her students and the fear of her enemies. This loss represents a broader tragedy. How much human knowledge and achievement has been lost to violence, neglect, or deliberate destruction throughout history. Every time a library burns, every time a scholar is silenced, every time curiosity is punished rather than rewarded, humanity becomes a little poorer. But perhaps that's also why her story remains so powerful. Hypatia represents not just what was, but what could be, a world where knowledge is valued above power, where questions are welcomed rather than feared, where the content of someone's mind matters more than the circumstances of their birth. Conclusion: the eternal flame. As we conclude Hypatia's story, we are left with profound questions that echo across the centuries. What would our world look like today if Alexandria's tradition of free inquiry had been allowed to continue? How many other potential Hypatias, brilliant minds whose contributions we'll never know, have been silenced by societies unwilling to challenge their own assumptions? But perhaps the most important lesson of Hypatia's life isn't about the tragedy of her death, but about the power of her example. She showed that it's possible to live with intellectual integrity even when the world around you demands conformity. She demonstrated that the pursuit of truth is worth any sacrifice, even the ultimate one. Today, when we face our own challenges to intellectual freedom and rational discourse, we can draw inspiration from this remarkable woman who refused to be silent, refused to be intimidated, and refused to accept that any question was too dangerous to ask. Hypatia of Alexandria died in 415 CE, but the flame of curiosity and courage she represented burns on. Every time someone asks a difficult question, challenges received wisdom, or stands up for the right to think freely, they honor her memory and continue her legacy. In the end, that may be the most fitting monument to this extraordinary woman, not marble statues or golden inscriptions, but the eternal human commitment to seek truth wherever it may lead, whatever the cost. The lost scholar of Alexandria may be gone, but what she stood for, the magnificent, dangerous, essential human drive to understand our world and ourselves, that lives on in every curious mind, every brave question, every refusal to accept that some things are too important to examine. Her story reminds us that in every age, in every society, the choice is ours. Will we be the ones asking questions or the ones throwing stones? Will we light torches or put them out? Will we build libraries or burn them down? Hypatia chose her path with full knowledge of the consequences. The question that echoes across 15 centuries is simple but profound: what choice will we make? How did you like the story? Please don't forget to share your valuable feedback in the comments. We would truly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the story, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much.